So your content focuses a lot on Japanese culture, Zen, but obviously it spans internationally, like we're speaking right now, right? So do you see a really big crossover in pain points between like the East and the West? So is there something that everyone is really struggling with, or everyone is hurting with that transcends like their immediate culture?
I believe every like Eastern philosophy and Western philosophy or any religion basically send the same message. I think the approach is different. Like if you want to go to the Hawaii from Japan, it's the we should different take a different path. But if you're coming from Europe, it's a completely different path, or from US. But if the destination is the same, which is love and unity, and to be fulfilled and to serve and to help others and to connect, I think it's the same message, but it's different language, different approach, maybe the different perspective, but we all want to get to the same place. So the Western, like it's a great example that that Zen and Buddhism is actually coming from India, but those Eastern philosophy and Stoicism speaks about very similar thing with the discipline and the rules and to be straight, the honesty and everything. It's very similar.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting because I feel in so many ways, I feel like the West thinks that it's very, very advanced compared to the rest of the world. But we're seeing this popular movement of being curious about old traditions, old philosophies, old spirituality. And a lot of that goes back to Eastern philosophy. So it's almost like these things that we have written off as woo woo, or it's not going to help us with the climb, so it doesn't have intrinsic value. But we're coming to this place where we might have a lot of financial prosperity, a lot of technological advances, but there's still something missing. And a lot of people will say it's like this God shaped hole that we all have inside of ourselves. So we're going back to these things that were previously written off. And I just think it's really fascinating that a lot of that comes from that side of the world, and we're trying to get back in touch with it. I think your work is amazing in that regard. I wanted to talk about the your favorite samurai philosophies because I was starting the Five Rings, and then you had mentioned it and you had a little series on that. So I would love to get into what are your like some of your favorite samurai philosophies and how we can utilize them today.
Yes. So one of the my favorite quote from this specific samurai called Musashi Miyamoto. It's very famous. I think the author of the Book of Five Rings. He is known as like the best samurai, but there's a lot of story to it. There's another guy called Kojiro Sasaki, and in the story, some people says that like he actually lost to Kojiro Sasaki, even though he did this little like strategy that he came to the battle very late, and that was one of his strategy because that actually affect the opponent Kojiro Sasaki in emotional level. So he was very stressful. So that was kind of like a strategy, and that is not like a samurai philosophy. You have to be, show up and like. But his philosophy into fighting was very like you gotta win. If you lose, then you die. So if you don't
Mhm.
win, the philosophy doesn't mean nothing. That's his philosophy. That's basically what he says in the Book of Five Rings. But one of his the best quote is I actually have a tattoo on it. But all exists within, and seek nothing outside of yourself. There's nothing there's nothing that can enable you to be smarter and quicker and better and wiser outside of yourself. So everything is within. So I can never seek anything outside of yourself. And that is, I think we all, like you said, there's a lot of temptations that gives us an opportunity to flip the arrow towards like environment, people, friends, and girls and boys, and the materials stuff and cars and whatever it is. But I think when somebody annoys you, when somebody laugh at you, when somebody was, broke your heart, I think we should flip the arrow and then back it to yourself so that you can learn a lot and you can realize and expand your self-awareness. I think that's what matters the most, and that's what I've learned the most, that I practice on a daily basis as much as I can.
Mhm. Yeah, there's so allegedly, and I never know what's true because it's like as time goes on, it's like this the fish gets bigger every time someone tells the story, right? Like the time that they caught that fish. So when it comes to grandparents telling you stories, it's like every time it gets a little bit grander
Yeah.
and more magical and more unique. So again, like I don't know how true this is, but so my grandmother she's in her 90s and she's like this adorable, beautiful Japanese woman, and she tells us stories about her home and, like, her lineage and all of this, and she has this collection of real samurai swords, and they're
Wow.
stored. Allegedly, I'm gonna be able to get them one day, but right now she's, like, holding on to them, and she would always tell us that, like, in battle, it's thought that the soul of the person that was killed with the sword kinda like it's entrapped in the sword, so I've always just had this fascination with, like, samurais and just, like, their mindset and the way that they lived their life, and there's this fable that and I'm gonna butcher it. I wish I reviewed it before this, but it's essentially that these samurais had conquered a temple or, like, conquered, like, some kind of castle, and they were taking, like, the king or whatever it was, and he was to be executed, and this person spit in the samurai's face, and the samurai got filled with rage. So he left, and the king is like, "Ha, ha, ha, like, I've escaped death." And, like, a couple days go by and he came in and he's like, "Well, why didn't you kill me?" And he's like, "If I killed you then, I would have killed you out of anger. But now I've centered myself." And then at the end of it, he ends up cutting the guy's head off. So it's this story of like not becoming a slave to the external and not like being so easily taken by your emotions and being able to still do what you need to do, whether that's metaphorically or literally chopping someone's head off, but to do it from a centered place. Like you can do the same thing from alignment and you can do this something else that is totally out of bounds.
Yeah, I actually had that story too. Yeah, it's
Oh, I wish you told it. You probably would have told it much better.
no, but I completely forgot about that story. But it's so true that the samurai or the stoicism teaches a lot of this emotional intelligence, and I think
Mhm.
that takes a lot of discipline and like understanding and self-awareness, I believe.